Okay, guys, this is the VA for AP Euro for March 31st. We talked about the English Civil War yesterday. We're leading towards the Glorious Revolution now. We're talking about James II becoming James II, who is the brother of Charles II, taking over in 1685, leading towards the Glorious Revolution. So, suspected of being a Catholic, like all previous Stuarts, James immediately antagonized Parliament by demanding the repeal of the Test Act, an act passed during Charles II's reign that effectively barred Catholics from serving as royal officials or in the military. There was no law at this time barring Catholics from the monarchy. James also issued a declaration of indulgence, which suspended all religious tests for office holders and allowed for freedom of worship. On the surface, James appeared to have been a champion of religious freedom. This was deceptive. What James really wished to achieve in England was royal absolutism. However, the steps that he took to achieve this goal were illegal. The final stages of the conflict took place in 1688. Early in this year, James imprisoned seven Anglican bishops for refusing to read James' suspension of the laws against Catholics from their church pulpits, the usual way of informing the community of royal edicts in an age before modern communications. James also unexpectedly fathered a child in June of 1688, and he had now had a male heir who would be raised a Catholic, in contrast to his previous heir, his daughter Mary, who was a Protestant. These moves to create a Catholic England created unity among previous contentious Protestants factions within England. One faction of this political and religious elite invited William, the stadtholder of Netherlands, or William of Orange, and the husband of Mary, who is James's daughter, to invade England. When his troops landed, James' forces collapsed in what was basically a bloodless struggle, except for Ireland, where there was tremendous violence over the next several years, was known as the Glorious Revolution. James was overthrown, and William and Mary took over the throne. What followed was a constitutional settlement that finally attempted to address the pervasive issues of this century revolution. The settlement consisted of the following acts. The Bill of Rights forbade the use of royal prerogative rights as Charles and James had exercised in the past. The power to suspend and dispense with laws was declared illegal. Armies could not be raised without parliamentary consent. Elections to Parliament were to be free of royal interference. The monarchs also had to swear to uphold Protestant faith, and it was declared that the monarchy could not pass into the hands of a Catholic. Most importantly, Parliament's approval was now officially required for all taxation. The Act of Toleration was in many ways a compromise bill to get nonconformist Protestants who were not members of the Church of England to support the crucial months of 1688. Whigs and Tories, Whigs being the more liberal parliamentary faction than Tories, promised that an Act of Toleration would be granted when William became king. The nonconformists could have achieved liberty of worship from James II Act of Toleration, but as an act from a popular Protestant monarch would prove to be a better safeguard to their liberties. The Act of Toleration granted the right of public worship to Protestant nonconformists, but did not extend to Unitarians or Catholics. Those two groups were also left alone, although legally they had no right to assemble to pray. The Test Act remained, which meant nonconformist Jews and Catholics could not sit in Parliament until the law was changed in the 19th century. Okay, the Mutiny Act authorized the use of civil law to govern the army, which previously had governed only by royal decree. It also made desertion and mutiny civil crimes for which soldiers could be punished during peacetime, but the act was only in effect by a year-to-year basis, which meant that Parliament had to be summoned annually if no other reason than to pass this act. Although with the Bill of Rights provision against standing armies in peacetime, the Mutiny Act brought the army under effective parliamentary control. The Act of Settlement was passed to prevent Catholic Stuart line from occupying the English throne in 1714 when Queen Anne, the second Protestant daughter of James II, died childless. The throne passed to George I, the Elector of Hanover, a Protestant prince and distant kinsman of the Stuarts. The Act of Union in 1707 marked the political reunification of England and Scotland, forming the entity known as Great Britain. This unity was by no means a love match, and in fact primarily occurred because relations between the two previously independent states were so bad that on his deathbed, William III urged that union take place to forestall Scotland from going to war with England as an ally of France. As part of the agreement, Scotland gave up its parliament, but also allowed to maintain the state-sponsored Presbyterian Church and its Roman-based legal system. Now we're switching gears to the Netherlands and the more trade-based empire and republic. A center of commerce and trade, the Netherlands or the Dutch. The relative decline of Spain as an economic power was due in part to the growing competition from the Netherlands. The Netherlands had already achieved a central role in inter-European trade due to its geographic position and large merchant marine fleet. For example, it was the Netherlands that provided a connection between the raw material producers in the Baltic region and the rest of Europe. Beyond Europe, control over the lucrative spice trade in Asia was wrested out of the hands of the Portuguese, a situation which was made worse when Spain took control over Portugal in 1580, and found itself without resources to rival the Dutch in Asia. Increasingly, it was the city of Amsterdam, the capital of the Netherlands, rather than the Spanish-controlled city of Antwerp, that became the center of commerce in northern Europe. The city of Antwerp further declined after it was sacked in 1576 during the Dutch War of Independence. Part of the Peace of Westphalia that followed the war included the permanent closing of the Scheldt River that led to Antwerp's harbor, which also aided Amsterdam's replacing Antwerp as the economic center. Dutch dominance in part came from technological achievements such as the development of less expensive but ocean-worthy cargo ships, but the Dutch also proved to be creative in their establishment of the financial commercial institutions. The Bank of Amsterdam, founded in the early part of the 17th century, issued its own currency and increased the amount of available capital while also making Amsterdam the banking center of Europe. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company was established. The company operated under quasi-governmental control and was funded by both public and private investment. This kind of investment, used in the past, but not successfully in the Netherlands, gave rise to the popularity of the joint stock companies. Such companies allowed risk and profits to be shared among individuals. The large capitalization behind the Dutch East India Company allowed for the purchasing of more ships and warehouses. The Dutch also proved to be very nimble businessmen who that when the prices of spices decreased due to oversupply, then they quickly turned to other commodities such as coffee, tea, and fabrics. However, as the beginning of the 18th century, Dutch commercial power, although continuing down to this day, would lose its preeminent place in Europe to England. This golden age in the Netherlands produced a high standard of living, with wealth being more equally distributed than any other place in Europe. The Netherlands also stood out from the rest of Europe for its tolerant attitude towards religious minorities, with Jews fleeing from the Spanish Inquisition, and Anabaptists as well as Catholics finding a place among the majority Calvinist population. Political decentralization. Dutch exceptionalism was also extended to the political realm because politically the Netherlands didn't look like any other state in Europe. For the most of the 17th century, it was politically decentralized, with each of the 7 provinces retaining extensive autonomy. Wealthy merchants dominated the provincial estates, which retained powers far more extensive than those of national estates general from France, particularly in the area of taxation. Executive power, such as it was, came from the noble House of Orange, whose family members had achieved prominence for leading the revolt against Spain. The male head of the family held the title of stadtholder, an office with primarily a military function. No mere formality, as the Netherlands switched from fighting for its independence from Spain to economic wars against the English in a long-term struggle for survival against France. During the struggle with Louis XIV's France, the power of provincial states went into decline, while the authority of William of Nassau, the head of the House of Orange, increased tremendously, particularly when William became King of England after the Revolution of 1688. A golden age of art. Culturally, the 17th century proved to be a golden age as well. Dutch artists, reflecting the fact that the majority of population was Calvinist, didn't receive large commissions to be placed in churches. Although the Baroque style of painting penetrated the Netherlands through Catholic Flanders. Instead, Dutch artists painted for private collectors, who supported an incredibly large number of painters in a wide range of styles, including the production of large number of landscapes. Like so much else in the Netherlands, pictures were treated as commodities, with prices at times reaching speculative rates. The art market doesn't just flourish in Amsterdam, as shown as the thriving career of Frans Hals, the great portrait painter from Haarlem. Another gifted Dutch painter, Jan Vermeer, had initially thought of being a painter of historical scenes, but when he received no commissions, he turned to carefully compose genre scenes of everyday Dutch life, for which he had become justifiably famous. The greatest genius of the Dutch Golden Age was Rembrandt van Rijn, whose paintings, which were initially influenced by the high Baroque style and were later in the career more subtly painted, are fraught with a deep emotional complexity. One of his masterpieces, The Night Watch, transforms a standard group portrait of a military company into a revealing psychological study. We'll stop video